We recently saw the removal of the electric vehicle mandate that was done under the Congressional Review Act. But this reshaping of transportation was a huge feat. But could it be undone quickly by the next administration? So let's take a look on what it would take to undo the electric vehicle mandate and force us into electric vehicles. Now, of course, that picture, that vision, was halted by a single congressional vote, only to spark a fierce battle to bring it back. And there are people working on it behind the scenes. In 2025, the Congressional Review Act, or the CRA, was used to overturn California's ambitious electric vehicle mandate, a move that nullified strict emission standards and set a high bar for the revival. Here's why it's really difficult to reverse that electric vehicle mandate. The Congressional Review Act is actually a roadblock. In early 2025, the U.S. Senate voted 51 to 44 to use the CRA to strike down the Environmental Protection Agency's waiver that allowed California to enforce its Advanced Clean Car 2 program. Now, this program aimed for 35% of new vehicle sales to be zero emission by 2026, scaling to 100% by 2035. What's important to note is the CRA is a very powerful tool, and it signed into law in 1996, and it lets Congress nullify federal agency rules with a simple majority vote. And once the rule is gone, the agency cannot reissue anything, even substantially similar, without a new congressional approval, which is very difficult to get. Now, it was signed by the president, and this resolution stopped California's EV mandate in its tracks and barred the EPA from reinstating similar rules in the future. That's good news for everyone, no matter where you stand. If you want an EV, go buy one. If you don't want one, don't be forced to buy one. And this is why it matters. California's standards don't just affect the Golden State, it affects 11 other states and Washington, D.C. Adopting them is their plan, and it's influencing nearly 40% of the U.S. marketplace. The CRA's act sends shockwaves through the EV industry, environmental groups, and state governments. Undoing this ban is no simple task, but it's not impossible, and they proved it. Now, here's a path to undo it so that you can keep your eyes on this, because it's important to note there are people, like I said, behind the scenes who are going to be plotting and planning, once President Trump's out of office, how to get that EV mandate back into place. And why would they do that? Why else? Money and power, control, data collection, you name it, we've covered it all. And here we are again. People are already plotting, so you need to be aware so we can stop it. Path number one is a new congressional authorization, the legislative long shot. The most direct way to restore an EV mandate is for Congress to pass a new legislation explicitly allowing the EPA to issue similar rules. Now, this would require a bill to clear both the House and the Senate, and likely needed just a simple majority unless the Senate filibuster comes into play, and then land on the president's desk for a signature. Sounds straightforward, right? But not so fast. In today's polarizing Congress, getting bipartisan support for the EV mandate is almost impossible. The 2025 Senate vote saw even Democrats like Michigan Senator Lisa Slotkin, who joined Republicans to kill the EPA waiver, reflecting concerns from auto-heavy states where electric vehicles are very costly and impractical for rural drivers. Auto industry groups like SEMA, which is a Specialty Equipment Market Association, supported the CRA, arguing it protects consumer choice and avoids forcing unready technology on buyers. Meanwhile, environmentalists and states like California argue EVs are critical to meeting their climate goals. To pass a new law, a future administration would need unified control of Congress and the White House, maybe in 2029 or beyond, depending on election outcomes. Even then, they'd face lobbying from oil, agriculture, and auto sectors, plus skepticism from regions where EV infrastructure, charging stations, they just don't exist. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act have poured billions of dollars into EV chargers and tax credits, but only public sentiment still wavers. And remember, they put $5 billion into electric vehicle charging stations to only have 7 of them complete. That's absurd and a waste of your tax dollars. Now, only 31% of Americans on the 2025 Pew poll said they would consider buying an EV. A new law would need to bridge those divides, perhaps by offering more flexible incentives rather than strict mandates. Can Congress pull that off? Well, I'd suggest you keep listening to what I have to say to see what they might be planning. Path number 2 would be a new rule that dodges the CRA trap. If Congress won't budge, a future administration could try crafting a new EV rule that's different enough from the overturned one to avoid the CRA's substantially similar ban. For example, instead of California's 100% zero emissions goal by 2035, the EPA could propose a rule emphasizing hybrids, plug-in hybrids, or alternative fuels with softer targets and larger timelines. That could be a problem, and this approach keeps the spirit of the emissions reduction without directly mimicking the nullified mandate. Here's the catch. Opponents like automakers or fossil fuel groups could sue, arguing the new rule is still too close to the original. Courts would get involved, and the outcome hinges on the judge's interpretations of the substantially similar, a vague term that sparked legal debates before. In 2021, when the Biden administration tried to restore some of the Obama-era fuel standards, critics challenged them as too similar to the rules previously axed by the Trump administration. A future EPA would need to be very clever, maybe focusing on incentives over mandates or tying rules to broader air quality goals. This path is a tightrope walk, but one that's worth watching. Path 3 would be legal challenges. Can California win in court? California isn't going down without a fight, and we've covered that before. The state's attorney general has already promised lawsuits, arguing the CRA was misused because the EPA's waivers weren't rules, but they were adjudicatory orders under the Clean Air Act. Now, this distinction matters. The CRA only applies to rules, and in 2025, both the Government Accountability Office and the state parliamentarian agreed the waivers didn't qualify. Yet the Senate ignored this advice, setting a controversial precedent. If California's lawsuits succeed, courts could reinstate the waivers, effectively undoing the CRA's impact. This happened in 2017 when a federal court overturned a CRA resolution that nullified a methane emissions rule, citing procedural errors. But courts are unpredictable, especially with the judiciary increasingly skeptical of agency power. A win for California could restore its EV standards and inspire other states, but a loss would cement the CRA's blockade. This legal drama could be a wild card, and we'll be watching and reporting on it. Path 4, executive action. Working around the edges. Even without Congress or courts, a future administration could push EVs through executive actions that don't directly challenge the CRA. For instance, the EPA could tighten other emission standards not tied to the overturned waivers, indirectly encouraging EV adoption. The Biden-era IRA offered up to $7,500 in tax credits for EVs, and the IIJA funds thousands for new charging stations, both untouched by the CRA. A savvy president could double down on these, funneling grants to states or automakers to boost EV production and infrastructure. That would be something to keep your eyes out for. Now, this approach has limits. It can't restore California's specific mandates, and aggressive moves might draw accusations of sidestepping Congress, inviting pushback from lawmakers and the industry. Still, it's a practical way to keep EVs in the game while other battles play out. Imagine a future where every small town has fast chargers. Possibly, but it will take time, a lot of time, and a lot of money, and we are far, far from that. Path number 5 is something we might be seeing, where the states take the wheel and California and its 11 allied states like New York and Massachusetts, well, they're not helpless. They can still put that mandate in place for their state. And that's a problem. They can still enforce EV policies, not relying on federal waivers through the CRA's nullification limits through their scope of what they want their residents to do. That's a problem, because I live in New York State, and we already have that problem with our governor, and she needs to go. For example, California could offer state-level tax breaks or rebates for EV buyers, as it's done before. And other states could follow, creating a patchwork of pro-EV policies, but without federal backing, their impact shrinks, and California alone cannot match the market sway of a national mandate. If California's lawsuit succeeds, states could regain broader authority. But until then, they're fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. This state-level grit is inspiring, but it's a reminder how much the federal government supports these matters. Here's the bigger picture and why this fight matters. Undoing the Congressional Review Act and the EV mandate ban isn't just about cars. It's about America's energy future. It's about climate goals, and it's also about political power. all tied into one. The one big factor is electric vehicles cost more upfront, about $10,000 more than its gasoline comparative, according to Kelley Blue Book for 2025. So the average cost of an electric vehicle, $66,000. The average cost for gas power, $48,000. But then the charging network, it needs to be tripled to meet the demand by 2030, just from what we have today, and that's from the Department of Energy. Rural areas where 20% of Americans live often lack chargers and see EVs as impractical for long hauls. And if you live in the upper half of the country where the temperatures are cold, good luck, because we've seen people sitting in Chicago, Buffalo, and all over the upper half of the country unable to charge. On the flip side, the CRA vote reflects real concerns. Automakers warn that rapid EV mandates strain supply chains, especially for batteries, because they get all their materials from China, and it limits consumer choice. Rural voters and oil-producing states like Texas argue that EVs don't fit their needs. The 2025 vote showed bipartisan unease, with swing state Democrats wary of alienating workers in auto and fossil fuel industries, and any push to undo the CRA might address these voices, perhaps through hybrid-friendly policies or massive infrastructure investments. But again, that's raising your taxes, and nobody wants that. So what's next? Well, timing and politics is everything. And the CRA's 60-day review window means a new administration in, say, 2029 would need to act fast, proposing new rules or legislation before a new Congress shifts to the next political landscape. Control of Congress is key. A divided government could stall progress. Public support will also matter. If EV prices drop, as projected in 2027, but who knows, especially with the rare earth minerals coming from China, that's going to be a huge factor. And chargers, that's another huge issue, especially since they've been defunded, become as common as gas stations. Well, voters might demand stronger policies. They might demand better EVs at better prices. But if gas prices stay low and battery shortages persist, resistance could be hardened, and that could be a problem. This is really a chess game of power and how it will shape what's possible. Remember, if you take it all away, somebody's making money. The government has control. They know about your data and they can limit your choices. And that's not what America's about. It's about you choosing what you want to drive, where you want to go, and when you want to go. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee. And if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.